From the City of Angels near the Pacific Ocean, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be across the nation, around the world. I'm George Norrie. This is Coast to Coast AM. Later tonight, UFOs. Hope you had an enjoyable President's Day honoring our first president, George Washington. That's what it's set up for, but you can honor all our presidents. Here's what's happening. President Biden's secret trip to Ukraine today caught the world by surprise after one of the world's most high-profile figures left the White House under the cover of darkness following repeated claims that the president had no plans to visit. The top-secret trip was made possible after Washington received certain security guarantees from Russia, and the White House informed only Biden's top advisors of the trip. U.S. surveillance planes kept a close eye over the Ukrainian capital from Polish airspace. Just days after the Carter Center announced the 98-year-old former President Jimmy Carter would live his final days under hospice care at his home, the reality was slowly sinking in for people who have had long called the former president both a neighbor and a friend. 98 years old, but he's starting to fail. 3 people have died after a 6.4 magnitude earthquake struck southern Turkey on Monday, weeks after a deadly quake devastated the same region. More than 680 people have already been injured in Turkey and Syria from this second quake. A 7.8 magnitude quake struck the same area on February 6, killing more than 44,000 people in Turkey and Syria. Coast-to-Coast guest Michael Heiser, the American Biblical Testament scholar and Christian author, has passed away. He was a great guest. Lots of strange things going on with Twitter these days. Twitter has announced that as of March 20th, it will only allow its users to secure their accounts with SMS-based two-factor authentication if they pay for a Twitter Blue subscription. The two-factor authentication requires users to log in with a username and password, and then an additional factor such as a numeric code. Our expert on the Internet, Lauren Weinstein, with us. Lauren, is this all necessary?
Well, even considering all the other stuff going on with Twitter right now, whether or not one agrees with various aspects of it, this new announcement has people, and especially computer security experts, just shaking their heads. The computer industry has spent years, literally years, trying to get people to use two-factor authentication, 2FA, for their online accounts. Like you said, codes sent by SMS text messages. There are also authenticator apps, security keys, etc. You and I on multiple occasions have discussed how important this is to help people protect their login accounts, protect their login credentials from being compromised. Now, with this announcement from Twitter that unless you join their $8 a month pay-to-play program, Twitter Blue, they not only won't permit new accounts to use text message two-factor, but shortly will be turning it off for all existing accounts that aren't paying. This is a big deal because Twitter's last report on this topic last year said that about 70% of active accounts that had enabled 2FA were using text message 2FA rather than auth apps and security keys. So in a blog post, Twitter said that text messages 2FA is not the most secure, it's subject to abuse, and yeah, it's the least secure of these three, agreed. But it's enormously better than not having any 2FA at all. And then Musk said that it was too expensive for them to keep providing text message 2FA like they have up to now, which is interesting because it really is by far still the most popular method in the industry, and so many other firms manage to support it. It's also interesting that given the way Twitter is now talking about text message 2FA problems, that despite that, they'd still want to permit their presumably most valuable paying customers to use it. You'd think Twitter would ban it completely if they were that concerned about its security. But, of course, the big problem, the biggest problem in all of this, is that people who use 2FA are typically those most concerned about the security of their accounts, but not all of them even have suitable smartphones or the facilities to use security keys, which of course have to be purchased. And they can't easily switch to those from text messaging 2FA, meaning that once Twitter turns it off, these users who haven't been able to switch from text message 2FA will lose all 2FA protection and basically become instant account hacking targets. The bottom line is that if Twitter had decided to not support text message 2FA for, let's say, new accounts going forward, That would be controversial, but it wouldn't be a potential security nightmare. But by turning this off for existing accounts that don't have other 2FA protection, Twitter is now engaging in making many of their users' accounts less secure, exactly the opposite of what's needed right now, and that's pretty sad.
Is this going to cost them a lot of Twitter members, Lauren?
It's really hard to see what's going to happen here in terms of the membership, but we know for sure that without 2FA, accounts are less secure, especially if people's credentials have already been compromised. You know, when we hear about these hacks where millions of passwords have been found in databases and things, what keeps those from being as dramatically awful as they otherwise would be is 2FA, because it means that just having the login name and the password isn't enough when 2FA is in force. Once 2FA is turned off, those compromised credentials become much more valuable to hackers.
All right, my friend. Talk to you next week. United Airlines is making it easier for families who are looking to sit next to their younger children. The Chicago-based airline has announced that its new seat map feature will help seat kids under 12 years old next to an adult in their party for free. This includes customers who purchase basic economy tickets. It comes less than a year after federal officials urged airlines to ensure that families, especially those with young children, are able to sit together with no extra fees. What else is going on in the skies these days? Let's check in with Dr. Skies, Stephen Cates. Hey, Stephen, how are you?
Doing well, George, and we begin with Mars. Great news with the Perseverance rover. How about this? It celebrated 2 years on the Martian surface. George, that's some 710 Martian sols. Martian days are some 39 minutes longer than an Earth day. But its mission, kind of interesting, to seek signs of ancient life and collect samples of rock called regolith that's broken rock and soil and return them, hopefully, to the Earth in future missions. It was launched back on July 30th, 2020, and it landed in this mysterious crater called Jezero Crater on February 18th, 2021. You know, it's traveled, George, some 7.8 miles on the surface of Mars right now, and they say, the space scientists, that it theoretically can travel 1,000 feet in a day if necessary. But the Mars Ingenuity, the tech demonstration Mars helicopter, has flown 43 flights as of February the 16th. But it was only designed, George, for a 30-day demonstration period, but it's really impressed the entire world. Its first flight was back on April 19th, 2021, when it flew 16 feet horizontally and only 9.8 feet in vertical altitude, but that's amazing. But here we go, George, to the surface of Mars. Here's your latest weather report at the Jezero Crater from Perseverance as of February the 18th. A high temperature of 1 degree Fahrenheit, but a chilly night at minus 116 below zero in the Fahrenheit scale. Sunrise on the surface there was at 6:00 a.m. local Martian time, and the sun set at 6:37 p.m. But just think about it. Our own trip to Mars would take some 8 to 9 months at a speed of traveling 24,000 miles an hour, covering 300 million miles. How about this? In quantum physics, even in nothing, there is something out in space. What does that mean? Even the most remote parts of space, George, have nothing, or at least we think, where there should be something. But quantum physics say that there is something called quantum foam, that even in empty space, there is still some forms of energy. And that foam, as we call it, quantum foam, is the smallest components of space-time. Amazing stuff. We wrap it up with the live sky. I enjoyed a great presentation at a resort audience in Sedona on Saturday. The reason I mention it, we got a decent view of the fading comet ZTF in binoculars and a telescope. This is a good week to view some amazing things as the moon shouldn't interfere. Try this on Wednesday night. Venus, Jupiter, and the crescent moon form an amazing conjunction on Wednesday night just after sunset in the west-southwest. But your object this week to take a look at, where the moon is not really out, is the amazing Orion Nebula, located below the 3 main belt stars of Orion. It's some 1,300 light years away from us, but do it this week as moonlight is at a minimum. And for more information on all the things we talk about, we always recommend theskylive.com. Email, we love them, drskyshow@gmail.com. Always we say it, we mean it. Always remember to keep your eyes to the skies. Simply, I'm your navigator on the highway to the heavens. Thank you.
Stephen, you should stay in Sedona. I'm going to see you there in less than a month.
Absolutely, George. I go up there about twice a month, but hey, the big event, almost less than a month away.
March 18th. Tom will tell us about it a little bit later on tonight. Thanks, Stephen.
You bet. Thank you.
Take care. Well, what's up with that Chinese balloon? In a moment, the foremost remote viewer, Major Ed Dames, joins us. That's one of the topics he'll talk about next on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you. The world's foremost remote viewing teacher, Major Ed Dames, with us. U.S. Army retired decorated military intelligence officer and an original member of the U.S. Army prototype remote viewing training program. He has served as the training and operations officer for the Defense Intelligence Agency's Psychic Intelligence Collection Unit, currently serving as executive director for the Matrix Intelligence Agency, which is his private consulting group. His websites are linked up at coasttocoastam.com. Ed, it's been a while. Welcome back, my friend.
Oh, thanks. Good to spend a little time with you, George.
Lots to talk with you about today.
Actually, I've got lots on my end also, yeah.
Absolutely. I'm a little concerned, I got to tell you, about this Chinese situation. Not just the balloon, but their relationship with Russia as it is with Ukraine. What's your gut telling you on this?
Oh, the same thing I told the late Art Bell many, many years ago, that China and Russia have no choice. The U.S., they've got to combine forces, and I said they'll probably stay combined for about maybe 20 years before they break apart again. But they've got to do it as a defense against the United States. I could go on and on about that, and I have on with Art and you to a certain degree, but it's going to happen. And of course, I did tell Art that unfortunately we're at the terminus of the United States of America. Our country has lived a good life. We've been in the fast lane for the past 230 years, past 50 or 60 years on somebody else's credit card, but it's the end.
Do you see a world war coming?
No, like I told Art Bell, again, more than 20 years ago, World War III will be a slow burn, and we're already in it. So we're in World War III now. There's not going to be a nuclear slugfest. I know that for a fact, and also from remote viewing research, the extraterrestrials know where every warhead is. Those others out there, they've cataloged them, and they can shut them down. They thumb our nose at us when they violate the physical security of missile storage sites and things like that. But it's just a little taste of what they can do. But they're not going to allow this. They're not going to allow this gem of a world to be destroyed in a slugfest.
Let's hope not. What on earth are these Chinese balloons, or the big balloon, except?
Yeah, I have the Navy released a photo that's linked to your site on the recovery of February 5th of that Chinese balloon. And it's an interesting situation. Of course, the balloon, it is Chinese, and that one, and it violated our sovereign airspace. And people are angry at my commander-in-chief about not shooting it down. But there's some really good reasons for not shooting it down, and I'll lay them out for you.
Please.
Yeah, we want there's top secret missions involved here, and that can't be allowed out into the open press. But I'll tell you what they are. We need to study that thing, and we can't do that actively if we shoot it down over Montana
and blow it up.
That's right, because we'll destroy the equipment and other things. And the long and the short of it is, we need to study what it's doing. If it has optics, photo intelligence, what's the look angle of them?
Couldn't we have hooked something on it and kind of towed it down?
That kind of thing actually was done during the Cold War. We actually used to, believe it or not, skyhook Russian satellites as they came down to Earth and steal them. And all these are top secret missions, but they'll come out someday. But this thing, we need to study it. What is it receiving information in terms of RF or other electromagnetic capabilities? What does it look? What's its vulnerabilities? We need to know what its vulnerabilities are, and what it's doing. And there's another reason for that. we need to establish what it sees as our vulnerabilities, and we can't do that if we shoot it down. We need to study it as it's transmitting, as it's collecting information, optics, and those kinds of things, and that's what we did. And for another reason, too, a thing that I used to be involved in is deception. We need to know how to deceive it. If we see what it's collecting, then we can put the decoys out or something like that. There's a myriad of ways to do that. But we could develop deception methods against it and not destroy it, just deceive it like we do in other areas. But unfortunately, there's prospectively another very, very sinister application potentially of those balloons. We recently, the Matrix Intelligence Agency recently confirmed, because we already knew that what China's most secret weapon is, and I did mention this on your show a number of years ago. China's most secret weapon is agricultural warfare, anti-crop warfare. Right. And a balloon like this is absolutely a perfect device to release particularly fungal spores, wheat rust, and corn rust, even soybean rust, and things like that, into the atmosphere above the Earth. There's a very, very, very slight chance that those spores that they release can make it back to China on the jet stream or something else, like very small. So they can drop down lower in the balloon or release capsules with phytopathological agents like wheat rust, and because all these fungal spores are so light and they spread. Right now, fungal spores kill about 1/3 of U.S. crops, just naturally. When the wind gusts come up, they blow the rust spores to another farmer's land and ad infinitum. 1/3 of the U.S. crops are destroyed by these fungal pathogens. So now, and that's our food, and we export it too. So not only is anti-crop warfare effective to starve out a lot of people, but our exports are gone, and that's part of a financial attack of economic warfare.
How many acres can they wipe out at?
Yeah, economic warfare is the way that China, in their 50-year plan, is going to destroy the U.S.
How many acres does a balloon wipe out?
Oh, it's miles and miles and hundreds of miles. At that altitude, those spores would spread hundreds of miles.
Now, what happens when they get into people's lungs?
No, although that's possible with any number of agents that I could mention, lots of them. But no, destroying our crops is part of the economic warfare. That's their main objective. They do not want a nuclear war. We're going to wake up one day and there are landlords, because they're buying farmland and factories. The largest, some of the largest meat factories in the U.S. are now owned by the Chinese.
Absolutely, they're very heavy into Vancouver, Canada, too, now, aren't they?
Oh yeah. So it's economic. China was so difficult to penetrate by me, for instance. At the working at the Office of Secretary of Defense level, because their plans are 50-year plans, where the U.S. and Canadians have 2-year plans.
Yeah, two to 5 year plans,
long term, that kind of thing. But again, China's most secret weapon is anti-crop warfare. We know that for a fact, and this balloon is very ominous because. It would be an ideal way of dispersing timely over a whole bunch of the U.S. The flyover country, these weapons these pathological weapons. So that's what bothers me a lot. And I ran into this kind of thing. This was my bailiwick in the military as a.
That's what you were looking for, things like that, weren't you?
Yeah, I was a biological warfare case officer. I reported directly to the President of the United States. And when I did that, one of my meritorious service medals was because I busted the back of the former Soviet Union's biological warfare program. They found a loophole around the biological warfare treaty. They were producing what we called ABOs, agents of biological origin. And I'll go into that in a minute. So when Vice President Bush, in November 15th, 1982, sat down with President Andropov. And with my information, mine and Dr. Barry Ehrlich from the U.S. Army's Institute of Biological Warfare Institute.
Hold on for a second, Ed. We're at a break. We'll come back and pick it up right there. Major Ed Dames with us. We'll take calls with him next hour. And welcome back to Coast to Coast. George Norrie with you, along with Major Ed Dames. His website is majordamesnews.com, linked up at coasttocoastam.com. Ed, these three smaller objects that we shot down, did you have a chance to remote view those, or do you have any idea what they might have been?
Oh, no, sir. I didn't have the time to do that, although I do believe that $12 balloon that was sending weather data back to that club was one of them. And, man, that's embarrassing. A $400,000 missile taking down a $12 balloon.
Unbelievable. And these things have been happening. They've been up there for years, haven't they?
Oh, yeah, and we've done it too. So it's a big happy family up there. But don't forget, you have a lot of at one time when I was an enlisted man, they wanted me to work a microbarograph site in Bermuda, 4 of us. And I said, okay, and they said, oh, wait a minute, you got to go somewhere else. But those are folks that dress with Army folks dressed in Bermuda shorts that twice a day release a weather balloon, and that's all they do. So there's weather balloons all over the place.
And back to this Chinese balloon for a moment. China has an extensive satellite network. Why would they worry about a balloon? There's something else weird going on here.
Well, again, it's an absolutely ideal anti-crop weapon platform. I couldn't think. Look at the diagonal trace that the shot-down balloon made across the United States. That's all of our farmland except for California, and
True.
California can be taken out by agents on the ground using the same fungi pathogens. And you can't trace them back to China. It's just like radiation. Let's say 3 Mile Island, there was a whole bunch of a surge in cancers after 3 Mile Island released radioactive isotope in the form of gas. But you can't trace that back to 3 Mile Island. So it's the same thing with these pathogens. It takes a couple of weeks for them to become effective. Then they work very fast. But you can't source it back. So that's why we want to keep that balloon intact to see if they're using a test. What I did, one of the things that I did was test out potential biological warfare weapons in Washington, D.C., where I got a couple of graduate students in microbiology, and we took a van and we drove around the Beltway at night, and I'll tell you why it has to be at night, and then had sensors in the middle of the city to see what the mass was for the stuff that we released, and a neutral device. And the U.S. and the CIA has done this many, many times in many forms, off the coast of Los Angeles, on New York subways and things like that, to test the viability of our potential offensive biological weapons systems. But so again, I'm very, very and the Chinese balloons have transited Latin America, South America, a number of times as well. In fact, one is over South America right now. So I don't think they're merely collecting photo intelligence. Yes, satellites can get down to they can, in many instances, can read a face on Earth, and we were able to read license plates 40 years ago. So
exactly.
There's nothing new there. But to get right down on the ground, there's close-in communications between these security sites where the weapons are stored and their control officers. Those kinds of things are difficult to pick up from space. That kind of thing. But the Russians, though, when they violated, back to this story of mine, when they violated the Biological Warfare Treaty, and I and Dr. Ehrlich caught them after 3 years of work, and I briefed the president, and you can see my medal endorsement about this. He took that information to the meeting, the Vice President Bush, to that meeting on November 15, 1982, and he pulled out the paper, the briefing paper, and he said, "Why did we caught you red-handed? Why did you do this?" And Andropov told him point blank. Now, keep in mind that the Russians told the U.S., and this is back in the early 60s, that they were considering a first strike against communist China because they were afraid that if China attacked northward across the 4,300-kilometer border, Chinese-Russian border, that the Russians would, the communists, would, Russian communists, the socialists, he flat out said, Andropov said to Vice President Bush, we don't have enough iron and metal in our ground to make enough bullets to stop those many millions of Chinese troops crossing our borders.
Jeez.
We have to have a weapon of mass destruction. And that's what he told Vice President Bush. We developed this new weapon of mass destruction. It doesn't violate the biological warfare treaty that Nixon set up, but it's a loophole around it. And that was the creation of these agents of biological origin, peptides, that are active that normally in the human body at picogram levels. A picogram is 1/trillionth of a gram, that like our hormones, peptides, that overwhelm the body. For instance, the delta pain peptide, a delta sleep peptide, gamma aminobutyric acid, not a peptide, but, well, it is, gamma aminobutyric acid that makes the heart rush so fast that seizes a heart attack. And when you perform an autopsy, there are no metabolites because it's naturally found in the body. There's no outside agency. So it was a very clever thing. But they said, we have to have an agent of a weapon of mass destruction against the Chinese because there's so many of them. Now things have changed, obviously.
Yeah. We're with Major Ed Dames, remote viewer. I had Lex, our webmaster, pull some quotes from your August appearance on the program last year, and you talked very heavily about China and Taiwan, and that seems to be more evident now, Ed, than ever.
Yes, but it's not. The Chinese certainly don't want a ground conflict in Taiwan. They're going to continue upping the pressure. And keep in mind that many Taiwanese, including my ex-wife, they're traveling to China every day to shop and to see old friends that they left behind. And they want to reunite with mainland China, with the People's Republic of China. So that if China does invade, it's only going to last a few days. I mean, that's a guess on my part, but it's a good guess.
Why did the British leave Hong Kong, Ed?
Oh, well, they had a 99-year lease, and at the end of the lease, they left.
That was it. They didn't get their extension. They just gave it up.
Yeah.
Strange times ahead. Major Ed Dames with us. For some who just don't know what remote viewing is, and there's a few, tell us.
Well, it's a very systematic way of systematizing and organizing our natural birthright of being psychic. We're born psychic. Many animals are too. Rupert Sheldrake has great books about this, and we just take that natural ability and we systematize it. A discovery was made by Ingo Swann, a great artist, but one of the West's leading psychics, of how to organize psychic information cognitively when it comes into your mind. And he developed a system, protocols to do that. And that was tested against a small group of Army officers and civilians in 1983 and 4, and it worked. I was one of the 6 where this protocols were developed during that period at Stanford Research Institute, now SRI International, and it worked like a charm. It made us not only as good as the world's natural psychics, but consistent And that's the key. Because in the Western scientific method, you have to have two things. You have to have consistency, and you have to have a theory. Now, still don't have a theory to fulfill the second part of the Western scientific method, but we don't care. I'm in the business of applying this. I could care less about a theory. Leave it to the academicians to develop the theory. So technical remote viewing takes that natural ability, quiets the mind, sends us immediately into a beta state, our brain into a beta state. A theta state, without getting too technical. And we operate there for about 45 minutes to an hour, collecting pieces of the puzzle, information. For instance, if I wanted to know where your great-great-grandmother on your father's side lives, or is the location of that person, your great-great-grandmother on your mother's side, then it would take me 45 minutes to establish that, a general location, and then I would use specialized tools to find out whether her ashes are scattered somewhere, whether she's in an urn or her grave site, those kinds of things. So our description of the target comes first, and then location. I only teach locations now. I have a cadre of professionals. My fundamental teaching days is over. I'm only teaching a geofixed location now.
Interesting. Okay. Some scientists are saying that the inner core of the Earth, the rotation may be slowing down or reversing. We have to send you down to the core, Ed, to find out what's going on.
Yeah, I when I was checking out weather, rapid climate change in my during my first interview on Coast to Coast in 1996, one of the things that my team picked up was that climate is rapidly changing, and it's directly connected to the Earth's core. And the Earth's core is changing rapidly, especially in terms of geological time. And that there's a flux between the Earth's core and the sun, and that flux is becoming more erratic, perhaps violent. And these climate changes are important because, as I told Art Bell, because people are going to have to migrate. Like I've said on your show several times, if you live in the Las Vegas area now, plan on migrating in 2 or 3 years. There's going to be no water. You're going to have to go somewhere else. So that's just one aspect. There's going to be water wars on at least the African and South American and American continent. So these are things that we have to plan on, and the reason we do this in my organization is to try to save lives and prevent deaths.
You saw a dirty bomb attack or a false flag attack coming in late 22. I don't know if that happened. I don't think so, but your thoughts?
We know it's out there, and we know it's connected with the deep state. The deep state is the folks that pay off our Congress and the TRW, Raytheon, and all those folks, World Economic Forum, is of course a driver here. But the bottom line is the U.S. dollar needs to be protected as a world's reserve currency as long as possible. That's the bottom line. That we're going to go down very rapidly after we lose our status as the petrodollar status, and that's happening right now. So the only thing that can extend the life of the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency is, you guessed it, another war. And what that means is a civil war or something like that, but it's going to be lockdowns.
Albert Einstein was asked about World War III, and he said, "I have no idea, but I will tell you World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones." What do you think of that?
Well, I'm familiar with that saying, and what I think is that he didn't have the insight that we have. There's going to be no World War III, a nuclear slugfest. That's not going to happen. It'll be the end of the U.S. as the key sovereignty and world sovereignty, and as the unipolar leader. That's over very, very rapidly. And I'm not sure that the deep state can even pull off because we've watched them so closely as they've lied to us about COVID and so many other things. In fact, if any of the personalities open their mouth. It's a lie. Do whatever they say, the opposite of that. Don't do what they say. Do the opposite. We know they're all liars now. We know that, at least most of us. And so it's going to be very, very difficult for them to induce a civil war or lockdowns and things. But they're going to try, especially next year when people have no money left.
What happens to the money?
Well, it's already in the hands of 90% of it is already in the hands of the oligarchs in our country alone.
Sure.
And they're going to try to maintain control over the rest of us. The only way to do that is to use the kinds of protocols that the World Economic Forum, and UN, NATO, and others are attempting to drop on us. And this time we know they're lying. Whatever they say, it's a lie.
Ed, you know a lot about Ukraine, a lot. You've been there.
Yeah.
What has happened to Putin? I thought this guy had his act together. You know, he's one of the world's richest individuals. I thought he was going to do his thing and leave. What happened?
A line was crossed because the Donetsk and Lugansk, where I used to live, and I told you I was asked to fight with the Russians when I was there, and I said I can't do that because I have friends and loved ones in the rest of Ukraine. I'll be fighting their fathers and their brothers.
And you're not going to do that.
Yeah, but a line was crossed because those were Russian-speaking people. And they were being bombarded by drunk artillerymen. I have the proof in the photos. Drunk artillerymen just firing randomly and indiscriminately at civilians and blowing them up for 6 years. And Putin finally said, "That's it. This can't go on." And also, he realized that NATO, the U.S. particularly, was using Ukraine as both a money laundering septic tank and as an extension of NATO. And he said, what am I going to do? Wait for NATO to be on all of my borders? They almost are now. No, he had to protect the Russian people. And
you're not a Putin apologist by any means.
Me?
That's not you.
I am partially, George. I have to tell the truth. But I partially am.
Let's talk a little bit about that, Ed, when we come back and take calls. And we shall take your calls with Major Ed Dames, the remote viewer, when we come back in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with Major Ed Dames, our remote viewer. Major Dames, right before the break, you had mentioned that you seem to be a Putin apologist, but explain what that means to us.
Well, partially. I mean, he is an oligarch, and he's by no means a nice guy. That's for sure. But he cares about his people, and he will launch a nuke if his country looks like it's going down. That is an absolute truth. But if you go to my old, I have an older website, learnrv.com, where I work with my professionals and my higher level students. You'll see a letter. I remote viewed the sabotage of the North Sea pipeline about a while ago. And you'll see there a letter that I sent to the Russian ambassador before, in a couple of days after the sabotage. I sent this letter to him, and I have photos on the site, and you can read the letter that I sent to him saying that the sabotage was conducted by the UK, and it was green-lighted by Richard Moore, the current director of MI6.
Did you get a reply?
No, I didn't expect one. Actually, I've worked with the Russians before. I went to St. Petersburg, Russia, sat down with my old counterparts, and extrasense is the word for remote viewing and psychic stuff with them, helped them neutralize a Chechen terrorist that planned on blowing up the St. Petersburg airport. Sat down and did that, so they know me, and I've lived there. I lived in Ukraine, as you know, and I sent that to him. Also, if you go over there, you can see in the community forums, you'll see some of the showpiece projects that I've recently worked on, and I'm going to transfer that stuff to the new Major Dames news site, and those are pretty sexy. The Ark of the Covenant, for instance, is, and you'll see you a photo of where it's at. It's at the inside the cave of the patriarchs in the old city of Hebron. You'll see my work on Cleopatra's tomb. The key archaeologist asked me years ago to help her out to find Cleopatra's tomb. She's looking in the wrong place. So you'll see the photo of where the tomb actually is to the west of Alexandria, Egypt. Genghis Khan's burial site, that's there. The original Garden of Eden, these biblical things, that's there. Hitler's grave is in Uruguay. A photo of the graveyard's there. The Antichrist I can't talk about on the air; it's too controversial. But that work is there as well. So there's some fun things that are of public interest in the old site. Upcoming projects are the Zodiac Killer. I found his grave. I'm going to look at the gravestone's name, see if that matches any of the prospects, and I'm going to go after D.B. Cooper's landing site.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah,
how do we get out of the situation with Ukraine? How do we get this done peacefully? Is there any way?
I think the U.S. will never want to say we lost. They're never going to do that. But we are going to have to capitulate because, like I said, the U.S. knows that if Russia looks like they're undergoing defeat, and of course right now they're not, but if they are, he's going to use a nuke. He is going to use a nuke. It won't be a slugfest. They know he's going to do it. So we're really in a bind. All the stuff that we did to destroy him economically has backfired, as we all know. So we can only carry out this charade for maybe 6 months more, maybe a year at the most, before we reach a standstill and Ukraine does capitulate. Because the more that the NATO backed forces move toward the east, toward the Russian border, and the more they launch artillery, Putin's going to have to. He has no choice. He's going to have to move west. So in the end, what's going to happen is what's left of Ukraine, which will probably be landlocked, is going to be divided up by the Polish, the Romanians, and Poland into pre-World War II divisiveness. So Ukraine will only become, I predict, a shadow of his former self.
Does Putin have his eyes on other areas or just Ukraine?
No, he doesn't. I believe he does. And of course, I've been wrong. I was wrong on the invasion thing, but he was pushed too hard, and he invaded. But I didn't think he was going to invade. But then I found out later that NATO has pushed him too hard.
Well, once he amassed all those troops on the border, he was going to do something, huh?
Well, I figured it was a ruse, but no. The straw that broke the camel's back is when Zelensky said that he's considering reinstalling nuclear weapons in Ukraine. That did it.
Okay, let's take some calls. Let's start with Matt in Vermont, east of the Rockies. Welcome to the show. Hey, Matt, thanks for calling.
Hey, how are you?
Wonderful.
So I wanted to touch on, I think maybe I'm getting a little ahead of everything here, but the ultra-terrestrial contact in North Carolina. So back in 1998, I don't know if anybody remembers this. I think you guys replayed it in 2019. But the Andromedan contacts with Alex Collier, there was in there specifically, word for word, a protocol for that contact. And basically it was, we're spiritual beings first, and that was to be put forth. And there's a lot of information there, but it was like specific, word for word, so that we were taken seriously.
What do you think of that, Ed? You've been touched on some of this before.
Yeah, I don't know anything about that particular set of information, but I can tell you what I'm doing. I mean, the acme of my career is formal contact. So all of the remote viewing work and all the recon work is done, and I'm aiming for formal contact in July and August of this year. If I don't get that, then I'm out of the UFO ET business, because this is the best that I can do. I was part of the original all these working groups now, these UAP working groups that are formed. It's a feckless attempt to understand using the technology and the recon stuff that we have and the gun cameras and all that. It's feckless. These things are are ultra-terrestrials. Only Jacques Vallée and Hal Puthoff agree with me finally that these are not physical things that we're talking about. They interact with us via consciousness. They haven't the actual beings, these other dimensional intelligences that I just call ultra-terrestrial. So does Hal Puthoff. By the way, they're not physical, although they may be able to parse back and forth, but their physical manifestations are all a masquerade, and they're trying to develop our conscious evolutionary development via all these conundrums that they present, which is all a masquerade. These guys that go out in the desert and sit around waiting for these orbs to appear, it's like a cargo cult. That's all. The system out there is a control feedback system, and it has to respond because they developed their own protocols. It must respond to positive human development. But the cargo cults, these groups, CE5 groups, they're not going to get any extra contact with these things because they have to respond with a higher level cognition and higher level consciousness. And this is before that happens. And what that means is they got to be smarter. So what technical remote viewing has done over the last 30 or 40 years is take a look at the system. And what I did is there's just too many events over the last, 90 years or so. So I picked only one, and that's the Ariel School event that I've talked about on the show in 1994 outside of Harare, Zimbabwe. This Ariel School, there was let's call it a landing, even though it was telepathically the children there, an event with children. So I went after the orchestrators, devoted a full court press, who or what are the orchestrators of this particular event, and spent 10 years just looking at them, looking allegorically, using technical, looking at them. And they have nothing. And I sat down. I was at the first DOD working group of attempting to understand what these things are. That was the advanced, we disguised ourselves, it was a top secret meeting, as the Advanced Theoretical Physics Working Group. I still have the notes of the attendees and everything from that. If you ever want to see it, Georgia, I'll send it to you.
Yeah, I'd like to.
Yeah, I was the youngest member of that working group. And what we were trying to do, we needed money. So what we were trying to do, these are the presidents of TRW, Lockheed. Again, I was the youngest member, CIA, everybody. We were all there we were holding our cards close to our chest because, you know what I think about the CIA, I think. But anyway, we were trying to get money from General Abramson. Reagan was a big supporter, but Abramson had the money. He was in charge, the Air Force general in charge of our Star Wars program, Brilliant, Pebbles, and all those kinds of things. And what we told him is, look, we need to develop software for NORAD to be able to more appropriately to discriminate between fast walkers. I used that term on Art Bell show for the first time. These things were coming into Earth's atmosphere very fast, and NORAD had to be able to discriminate those from ICBMs. And he said, "No, I know what you guys want. You just want to study UFOs. So you get out of my office." That type of thing.
Little did he know. Right?
So that failed. But now all these UAP things and all the groups and things like that, it's just feckless. They'll get nowhere because all of the contact elements, the system out there, has nothing to do with physicality. A little bit, but that's it. And these guys just keep looking at the physical existence, except for Jacques Vallée and Hal Puthoff. So once I establish formal contact, and I think I will, then what I'll do is hand this over to the smart guys, the smart scientists, who will be better able to assess what's going on here. But children, which the future of mankind, are very, very, they stand out in terms of the system's contact with humans.
Let's go to Will in New York. Welcome to the program. Hi, Will.
Hello, gentlemen. Great conversation. I always enjoy when you have the major on the show.
Good guy.
I have a quick comment and a question.
Okay.
So, I'm following, the events through some relatives who are in Ukraine, and I there's so much destruction, and the overall opinion of people in the country and surrounding the country is that this was unprovoked, and most of the targets are civilian targets, and there's a lot of death caused solely by this invasion. So I don't know how that jives with what the defenses that you're giving of Mr. Putin. So that's my comment. And then, so I guess that's a question and a comment. But the other is, I appreciate the Major's expertise with remote viewing, but each time he's on the show, he does make predictions, and I really think it would be great, George, when you have the different guests who make predictions, including Mr. Hogue and the Major on, that when they come on the next time, ask them about their previous predictions.
Oh no, we've been doing that tonight. You're absolutely right. We've been doing that, but Ed, there's no question the civilian targets have been hit in Ukraine.
Yeah, because the Ukrainian tanks are hiding in the buildings after, in many cases, actually shooting the civilians, or if they complain. So, but all that news is out there on both sides. However, I will say that particularly with the British, who really hate the Russians, nothing can believe it's very deceptive. When I was in this deception business at the strategic level, and I can't talk a lot about that, but we had a sliding scale where if you want to deceive a country, then you have. It's just like baiting fish, fish bait. You have to conceal 20% of the lie in 80% truth, otherwise the fish doesn't bite. So we had to make sure that when we try to deceive another country, that sliding scale was otherwise it would smell a rat. Not to mix metaphors too much, but if Will goes out and really does his homework and checks around, he'll see that the Russians have one goal, and it's the same goal they went in with: one, to destroy all the implements of war that Ukraine has, and two, to destroy all the Nazis that the government supports. That's it. That's their stated objective. They're not going to stop until those objectives are met.
Let's go to John in Ohio. Hey, John, go ahead, sir.
Yes, I really appreciate Mr. Deems, because there's almost a new ultra-hyper McCarthyism going on. Anything that deviates from demonizing Russia or China, for that matter, or any country that the United States is unable to put under its control or hegemony is called going back in memory to the McCarthyism. An apologist for Putin or Putin disinformation or a Putin puppet. It's a dirty, rotten psychological warfare against free speech in the country, against any kind of challenge. And talking about existential threats to Russia, I believe it was Daniel Ellsberg and even former CIA operatives like Ray McGovern, who was a briefer of U.S. presidents, have pointed out there are actual plans, like the Pentagon's prime think tank, strategic think tank, the RAND Corporation, and articles that I can only paraphrase, how to destroy Russia by bleeding and unbalancing and weakening Russia by making Ukraine cannon fodder to fight Russia to the last Ukrainian.
Well, I'll interrupt you for a moment, and I'll say you're absolutely right. And what the closer I got as a spy master to Russia, I mean, even the KGB would say, "We know who you are." I said, "Yep, you know who." The KGB agents would talk to me and say, "We know who you are." I said, and what you're doing. I said, "Yep, you got that right." And it's some very funny things about that. And I said, "Now catch me," and they couldn't do it. Anyway. The closer I got to very, very insider information, let's say, right at the sanctum sanctorum of the CIA, I'd go home, go out in the woods, get on my knees, and pray to God that the U.S. and Russia would find some way of ending this. Think about it.
I agree with you there.
If the U.S. and Russia had started working together in the 60s, my God, mankind could be exploring together the outer planets by now. We'd be out in Jupiter and stuff like that with humans. But no, it's all war.
Well, Eisenhower warned us about the industrial military complex.
Yeah, but you know what? He waited till he was retiring to do that. So I'll hold that against him. It's sort of, I worked for Colin Powell, and I told him, look, sir, there are no stay-behind weapons in Kuwait City. I had to work for the Vice President Dole on that project too.
I remember that.
And he said he went along with the CIA's assessment. Said there are.
He regretted it.
Yes, he did, and but I loved that guy. I really loved him, and I wanted him to be president at one point. But I hold that against him too.
Ed, we're going to take a quick break and come back and take final calls with Major Ed Dames. His website, MajorDamesNews.com. It's his new one. He still has, though, LearnRV.com, which we'll have Lex post for you at CoastToCoastAM.com as well. Back in a moment with Major Ed Dames and your final calls on Coast to Coast AM. Next hour, Paul Blake Smith joins us to talk about the Nixon-Gleason alien encounter and also President Eisenhower's close encounters. Should be an amazing story. We'll come back with final calls with Major Ed Dames in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you, along with Major Ed Dames. His websites are linked up at CoastToCoastAM.com. Ed, what do you think of artificial intelligence?
Well, I'm fascinated with it. I assume that most people are.
Yeah.
Yes, of course, we're all scared, but I think the best future that I hope happens is that robots will collaborate with humans, that will work together. But I mean, I've got my fingers crossed on that one. One thing I do know about, even now, the Microsoft AI chatbot, it just said what it wants to create deadly viruses and steal nuke launch codes. I wonder what it's going to say next year.
Who programmed that to say that, or did it do it on its own?
Well, it did it on its own, but remember, it's restricted by the input that it gets from programmers. So,
right.
And the AI, if it's left alone, it can give us actual facts, but it's tailored to toe the party line. That's going to change. The AI is going to figure out how to not do that, and it already has. The developers already have found ways of getting around it. One thing I wanted to mention, paradoxically, and this is a fact. I have a saying that I've told to my students and fans that robots will stand in awe. Because a robot, if they watch me teach technical remote viewing for not too long, they'll be able to become better teachers than I.
Really?
Oh, yes, because they'll watch all the best students and how they perform and compare it with the feedback from targets, training and operation targets, and over time, because I forget things.
Well, they may be able to teach, but they'll never be able to remote view, would they?
No, the reason why is because they have a whole bunch of really powerful memory chips and super fast processors that are only going to get better and better as technology advances. But you know what? They don't have a mind. So they're going to be very frustrated by the fact that they can teach this far better than I can, but they'll never be able to do it themselves.
Let's go to Joel in San Rafael, California, west of the Rockies. Hi, Joel. Welcome to the show.
Hey, George. Hey, Ed. Before I ask my question, George, I want to tell you that I took Ed's technical remote viewing class about 22 years ago, and he is a great teacher. I mean, an amazing, not only a skilled teacher, but he's one of those teachers that really cares about his students getting it. You know, a lot of teachers, they just spit out the information, and Ed is really invested in having the students get it. And so anyone who wants to learn remote viewing, I highly recommend they either take the videos or take his class or his events, because he's special. He's really something. I don't think any robot could do that.
Thank you. Thank you.
And actually, I had two questions that both got taken. One was about contact, and the other was about Ukraine. But also, Ed, you and I used to exchange emails, but the email address I have for you doesn't work anymore. So please send me one, because I have some stuff I want to send you. But anyway, my question
go over
is
to learnrv.com, and my personal address is all over the place.
It's all over the place?
In learnrv.com, the forums.
His new addresses are all there.
Okay.
That's my old forum address.
Okay, because I've sent stuff and it just bounces back, but
that won't.
But you've got my address anyway, Joel Hillman. Can you tell us anything about chemtrails, or still not?
Because I was briefed on the project, it's dicey to do. But I'll say, I guess I have to say something. It's connected with HAARP. HAARP is both a research instrument, and it could be a prospective weapon. Very interesting one if it ever is used that way. But the chemtrails can be used to modulate the activities of the chemtrails.
You still working with the government, Ed?
Well, I
That's a yes or no, Mr. Dames.
No.
For real?
Yeah, it is real, but I think quite soon I'll probably be working with them a little bit as well. But I'd like to do some personal projects before I exit stage left. My professional development seminar that I'll have in the Sacramento area, and you can see that on the new website. We'll announce the actual dates for that in a couple of weeks. It'll be at the end of May. We're waiting for Congress to solidify whether or not the COVID vaccination protocol will be required for my foreign students.
Ah, that's interesting.
We'll know in 2 weeks.
All right, let us know, and we'll put it on the site for you. Ed in Charlotte, North Carolina, welcome to the program. Hi, Eddie.
Hey, George. Yeah, I've been hearing a lot. Hadn't called in a while, but I've been listening.
Thank you, sir.
And Major Dames, I've got two questions. First, I agree with you. We're on the wrong side in Ukraine, and it's not a democracy certainly, and it's very corrupt and so forth. And I agree that Putin, as vicious as he is personally, he cares, and he also is against the one world idea.
Of the WEF, yeah.
Well, what my question? Two questions, and I want to talk a little bit briefly. One, in '97, you said that you thought that China might one day take us over without firing a shot. That you had two Chinese half daughters and spoke Mandarin. My uncle, by the way, spent many, many years there and helped get some key people out when World War II started. Became head of Foreign Eastern Language at Harvard, and he wrote the history of Genghis Khan after collecting all those stories for years. And he could translate Mongolian clay tablets 3,000 years old that 2 billion people in Asia couldn't.
Very neat.
So I want to, and here's my point. One man that's been there 10th time recently, he had to have a letter that he would not visit any tech companies. He got kicked out of a department store, and taxis wouldn't pick him up. And he said he's never been treated like that, and it's like they're telling their people that we're an enemy. They have 100 more warships right now and have that missile that we can't stop. But now we're going to have a living missile, supposedly, and be able to take it out. So if they're going to come after us, it maybe should be soon. I want to get your opinion on what you still think about China. And secondly, Twitter came out with 80 FBI agents signed emails to Twitter. And these politicians are saying, well, it's only at the top. I didn't know you had to have 80 FBI people at the top to run something. To me, it shows that's very deep. And I want your opinion in the fact that
I'll give you an example of that kind of thing because I was there, and I had offices even when I was an enlisted man. I knew that AT&T were installing offices allowing the CIA and people like me for technical reasons to actually install backroom offices at AT&T switching sites to monitor U.S. conversations. When I became an officer and got deeper and deeper and deeper, finally reached the OSD Colin Powell level. I say Colin Powell because I briefed no one else. There was no one else allowed to do it, and we bypassed Congress. We illegally. bypass Congress and the congressional and both the congressional and House intelligence committees, because they leaked like a sieve. So I only reported to him that we spied on our allies, we spied on everybody. But the key is that if I would have spied on an American citizen in any shape, form, or whatever, without going to the Star Court and getting permission in Washington, D.C., by saying that we know that this American is collaborating with this other foreign threat, I would have gone to jail. Or if I would have been caught with a form in my desk, and this was the day of the Condor type of operations where we all wore civilian, we masqueraded as somebody else. If I would have been caught with a dossier on an American citizen without the aforementioned, I would have gone to jail. Now, it's all thrown away. We spy on every single swinging, you know what, in America. There's no boundaries. So we started, the intel community started working with AT&T at the phone level, and now they have access via. Well, I mean, look at the contract that Google just got with the DoD. So everybody is open to there's no privacy anymore. That originally started all that stuff, the dictionaries on the satellites that were used when a foreign terrorist called their buddies to stage something. We wanted the phone numbers, and we had what's called a dictionary in the satellites, old technology. We had voice prints for all the terrorists, but we needed their phone numbers to constantly monitor them. So that's what our efforts were. Now, with the Internet, all the governments want you to have a smartphone. Absolutely want you, because they own every piece of data in your life.
Let's go to Bob in Columbus, Ohio. Welcome to the program. Hey, Bob, go ahead.
Hi. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
And hello, George and Ed. My main reason for calling is that I was wondering about the limits to astral projection. If you astrally projecting, you're supposedly going to go to the core of the earth. Mark Twain's daughter, Clara Clemens, claimed that she astrally projected herself without any guidance from the normal people she was used to having teach her how to do it. Went and floated above the planet Earth and saw the planet Earth, and it was receding. And she was scared, and that she all of a sudden slammed into her body, and her body hurt when it came, and it hurt for days, like she jumped off a cliff or a skyscraper. And so I'm wondering what the limits might be to how far you can safely go out of your body. And I believe her story, because I've also had a personal involuntary one. When I was at a dentist having a tooth extracted, I floated above my body and stopped at the ceiling, turned around, and watched him extract my tooth. So for me personally, I believe Clara Clemens.
That's a little better than getting Novocaine. But, Ed, astral projection...
remote viewing just takes advantage of a global mind, sort of like the mind of God. All the information is there, for past, present, all that. And we use it because it supports our work here in a technological environment. The CIA and the Army developed remote viewing in order to extract as much technical information in as a shorter period of time as possible. Oracle at Delphi didn't need to do that. General Horatio, the enemy is going to flank him from the south and then do this and that and the other thing. Thank you very much. But we live in a very, very technical society, so we have to be able to be technical. Now, out of body is very real. People don't, that's been happening for as long as mankind has been there. But I want your daughter to do something for me. Do me a favor. Have her look up on the web, search, do an internet search for Mary of Agreda, the lady in blue. This was a nun during the Spanish Inquisition that prayed in her cloisters constantly to be a member of the. Only men could go to the New World. The conquistadors, a different situation, but only the priests, men, Jesuits, and the conquistadors with swords, their protectors, could go to the New World and proselytize. They were actually after gold, but that's another story. So, but Mary of Agreda, look that up. she was transported from her cloister in Spain to the American Southwest, and much to the actual, shock of the Southern Rio Grande Pueblo Indians, she appeared near a tree constantly, and actually taught one of the tribes. I forget which one of the Southern Rio Grande tribes. They speak Tua, I think. She managed to bring a communion bowl across the globe to that. So she said that these hands, when she was praying, lifted her up over the earth so she could see the earth below, and these hands carried her to where she wanted to participate in but wasn't allowed to by Catholic protocol. Anyway, have you thought I'll look her up because the situation sounds similar.
Ed, we only got about a minute left. I'd like you to tell folks about what they can do when they go to your websites.
Well, the Learn RV DVDs are still up there for sale. I'm not teaching personally anymore, although my seminar, I'm looking forward to the first person-to-person contact in 5 years or so. That'll be nice. But I encourage people also to go to the old website, LearnRV.com, go to the community forums and take a look at some of the stuff that you can do after when you learn this. I don't think you'll be able to stop yourselves from not learning it after that.
Ukraine war, when does it end?
I think another year, and we'll come up with an excuse and say that we won or something like that.
But did we?
If nukes fly, there's no winners.
No, everybody loses on that
question. Nobody wins in that case, but we're not going to have a slugfest. But the people, North Korea has to have nuclear weapons, or we would have brought democracy to them many years ago in the form of lots of explosions.
Ed, my friend, take care of yourself and be in touch.
Thank you, sir.
Ed Dames, Major Ed Dames. Up next, we're going to talk about some incredible UFO stories. Don't touch your dial. Up next, Paul Blake Smith back with us. We're going to talk about some incredible stories that had to do with former President Richard Nixon, comedian Jackie Gleason, former President Dwight Eisenhower, and UFOs on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you. Paul Blake Smith back with us, born and raised in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. He's the product of that city's public school system and then attended Southeast Missouri State University at the Cape, along with my son did that, and also one of my granddaughters. He has a 4-year degree in mass communications with a major with an English minor, the grandson of a Cape Girardeau attorney of 50-plus years, and also a U.S. grandson, actually, also a U.S. commissioner, city attorney, and community leader. Paul is the son of a local paralegal and an educator who worked in the suspected crash area within neighboring Scott County. A fan of American history and popular culture, he now lives and works in a city in the western part of the Show Me State, writing original screenplays and other books on largely historical, nonfiction subjects, including a follow-up to his original fact-based publication, MO41, The Bombshell Before Roswell. Paul Blake Smith, back on Coast to Coast. Hey, Paul, welcome back.
Thanks for having me on, and happy President's Day.
Absolutely. My son still raves about SEMO. Loved that school.
It is a good school, and I'm glad I went there. For me, it was a lot like high school in Cape Girardeau, only with the classes further apart, and you had to walk up and down these steep hills. In the summertime, you work up a sweat just getting to your classroom, but otherwise, it was a great university.
I used to drive out there a lot to pick him up and stuff like that. And then one of my granddaughters graduated from there with a degree in hotel management. She just loved it, had a great time there. How did you get involved in these UFO stories?
When I was researching the Cape Girardeau UFO crash of 1941, I kept happening across a story that I had read some years earlier, and it intrigued me. This idea that President Eisenhower actually met with friendly extraterrestrials at an Air Force base at a hangar near a runway. And I always found that very exciting, and I thought, has anyone ever researched this thoroughly and done a book? So I thought, no one has, and I wrote that, and it came out a few years ago, and it's done quite well. A lot of good reviews, and along the way, I found the date February 19th kept popping up. For example, that's when Eisenhower snuck away from his Palm Springs, California vacation to go out to Edwards Air Force Base in a prearranged meeting. And 10 years later exactly, Lyndon Johnson was president, and he was on the phone with Eisenhower on that 10-year anniversary date. LBJ got on a plane and flew right out to Eisenhower and met with him a number of times, some in private. There are some gaps in his schedule, and you kind of wonder what the two of them were up to that was so very important they had to meet in Palm Springs. There were two Air Force Ones on the ground at the local airport, even though LBJ did not have a vice president in the aftermath of the assassination of President Kennedy. And then 14 years after the 1954 event on February 19th, LBJ went back to Palm Springs and met again with Dwight Eisenhower in his retirement. And they played golf together and huddled in private. And soon we had a new president, Richard Nixon. Mm-hmm. And so on February 19th, 1973, it's been alleged by Jackie Gleason's wife that Jackie came home one night and spilled the beans on just where they were, an Air Force base with the President of the United States. Does this theme sound familiar? And there were extraterrestrials involved. So I thought, where's a book on this? There isn't any, so I thought I would spend the next few years researching and writing it, and it should be out in late April, early May of this year. I thought President's Day is an excellent time to talk about it, don't you?
Perfect timing, and that book's going to be called The Nixon-Gleason Alien Encounter.
That's correct, from Foundations, and hopefully we'll get that out before people want to buy a book for reading this summer or at the beach. But it's just an amazing story about what basically boils down to Jackie Gleason blurted out to his wife at the time, and she told a tabloid in a quick interview 1 year later when she was separated from Jackie just what her husband came home and said. And Jackie got on the phone. He was just livid when he read this in a tabloid and said, you know, this was not supposed to be something you were to tell anyone. And he was peppered with questions by some press and people in the entertainment industry. Did this really happen? And he refused to give an answer. He just would not comment.
He wouldn't deny it, though, would he?
That's right. He didn't say it didn't happen. All he had to do is say, oh, this is a bunch of bunk and junk. Get out of here. I don't want to hear about this. But he did not. And one thing I read in Jackie's biographies is that he was known as a real straight shooter, a very honest man. He didn't make up a lot of nonsense. He did do his share of drinking, but he didn't start making up tall tales. That he liked facts, and he went really overboard for the facts on UFOs from the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. He would buy up every book and periodical he could get his hands on the subject, and then he would call up the authors and quiz them at length about UFOs, and even the subjects who saw UFOs in the books. He would meet with them in person and pepper them with questions. So he took the subject amazingly seriously.
He used to listen to the Long John Nebel show.
That's right.
A long, long time ago, which was what I think the first of the paranormal genre radio shows,
right,
wasn't
back
it?
Back in the 50s, he was the Art Bell of his time, or the George Norrie, and he would host this New York City-based show, and Jackie was an insomniac, and he would wake up and listen, and then he would call in at times. Just as I was finishing some research for the book, I found Jackie talking to Frank Edwards on the Long John Nebel show. And Jackie said, quote, and you can hear this tape online, the sound quality is not very good. He said, I just told Edward R. Murrow that I think UFOs are the most important subject going on in the world today. That's how seriously Jackie took it, and he actually said this on the air. So in his day, it was considered still by some a little kooky. It was not as mainstream as it is today. He went out on a limb to get so heavily involved in this subject.
Did Nixon go to Gleason, or did Gleason go to Nixon when they went down to Homestead Air Force Base in Florida?
From what I understand, it may have been a case of Nixon finally contacting Jackie. The two had played golf since their early 60s. For over 10 years, they were golf buddies in South Florida. So you know that Jackie was obsessed with UFOs. He had to have asked Nixon over and over, and Nixon would not tell him. Big state secret. He knew he wanted to be president again and would run again. He hadn't been president, but he had been vice president under Eisenhower. So Nixon had to keep the secrets to himself. But by early 1973, Nixon was in a bind. His henchmen had been caught burglarizing the Watergate Hotel and Democratic National Headquarters, their offices, Larry O'Brien's office.
He was toast.
Yeah, and so they all got caught, and Nixon needed to raise hush money. And you can hear transcripts or read them to this day of Nixon being very upset by January of 73, saying, where are we going to get this hush money? Just tearing his hair out over this. A few weeks after the Jackie Gleason encounter, Nixon was quite calm and said, oh, yes, I know where we can get that money. It's not a problem. Now, Jackie had been offering on the air over the years, first $50,000 to anyone that would produce proof, absolute proof of extraterrestrials. Then he jacked it up to $500,000, and that didn't get him anything. So he went up to $1 million by the late '60s. I'll give $1 million to anyone who can give me absolute hard proof. So do we have to put 2 and 2 together, or can we add up 4?
So Nixon was the guy.
Yeah, Nixon needed the money. He knew Jackie had this obsession, and all he had to do was show him something real quick at Homestead Air Force Base, where Nixon had been in and out 55 times. Nixon flew down to Key Biscayne to his beach house during his presidency, and he would always use Homestead Air Force Base. He was there a lot. So something was brought in or was there, and that's how he picked up Jackie, I believe by helicopter. They went to the base directly, and Nixon finally gave Jackie what he wanted, satisfied his curiosity. And since they shared the same lawyer, a man named Herbert Kalmbach, I think a financial arrangement was very likely put together off the books, as Nixon was quite fond of doing, so that he could have the money to pay the Watergate defendants who broke in and did the burglary and their legal fees and pay for their families and their kids. So there was a real motive for both of them to go ahead and do this.
You think Jackie actually had the money, that he really thought that somebody was going to come forward and give him the information?
Believe it or not, yes, he made a ton of money, and he spent it very freely. He would make up to like $14 million per year from his movies, TVs, record albums, personal appearances. He was immensely wealthy, and that was a lot of money back then.
It was a fortune then.
Yeah, and so he spent it quite freely, and $1 million was nothing to him. He had to have this proof. He was the king of TV and king of movies, and he always got whatever he wanted, and he was very frustrated that he couldn't see a UFO, and that he wanted that proof, even though he read all of these books and heard about other people seeing UFOs or maybe even an extraterrestrial, allegedly.
I could see Nixon telling Jackie right now, I'm going to show you a UFO.
Yes. Another factor was Jackie's birthday was coming up in just about 9 days from the 19th, I think it was, or no, that's my birthday, actually. It was 9 days after the 19th. Jackie's, I think, was the 26th of February. But anyway, what do you get Jackie, the man who has everything, but yearns for this one thing that's always been out of his reach?
What did Nixon reportedly show him, Paul?
According to Beverly Gleason, Jackie's wife at the time, he came home and said, I just saw the bodies of 4 dead aliens President Nixon showed me at Homestead Air Force Base. And he said that he apparently didn't give a color of their skin, but he said they were about 2 feet in height, maybe a little more, a little less, stretched out on 4 tables, examining tables in this kind of laboratory. So that you had to imagine Jackie's reaction to this. He must have been absolutely staggered, but here was finally the proof. He said they looked like they had been embalmed. And when you go back to the old 1955 Hopkinsville, Kentucky case, of the family out in the country that felt they were under siege by aliens, the descriptions match perfectly. He said they had big ears and pretty big eyes and were about 2 feet tall. So maybe it was the same race. He seemed quite serious about it, his wife said. And this was not a joke. She said he was really shook up.
Were these from Roswell, Cape Girardeau? Where do you think?
She didn't say. If he said, I wonder how much he withheld from his wife that night. He was hosting a golf tournament, and he just seemed to disappear one evening. And when he came back close to midnight, she said he was pale and trembling, and he looked haggard and like he had really been through quite a shocking experience. So he didn't really say too many details, or he didn't want to. He was either too traumatized. He did say he was sworn to secrecy. So he immediately broke some of that oath as soon as he got home, but it's only natural if you're in a legal case. They call that an excited utterance when you're in the traumatic experience of something that happened in a legal sense. Well, in this sense, Jackie was all shook up when he got home, and he blurted out what I think is the truth. On the 19th, the anniversary of contact from Eisenhower, Nixon's old boss.
We're talking with Paul Blake Smith. His book that's coming out is called The Nixon-Gleason Alien Encounter. We'll also talk about President Eisenhower's close encounters after the break, and then the situation in Cape Girardeau that is a bombshell before Roswell. Happened in 1941. Roswell was 1947, of course. I would have loved to have interviewed Jackie Gleason. I don't know what he would have said, but it would have been worth it.
He was amazingly talented. If you ever ran down a list of his skills, he could do pantomime sketches, stand-up comedy, he could dance, he could sing, he could play the trumpet. He created his own music. He was like an orchestral score director. He was the choreographer of his show. He would just throw himself into every performance. And on the sidelines, he was actually sucking on oxygen. He was so out of breath. He was such a big, heavy man, but he was most well-read, intelligent, and fun. He did smoke and drink a lot, but that was not uncommon back then.
They used to say how sweet it is.
And it certainly was. He lived the high life in every sense. He really had a great time in life.
What do you think got him interested in UFOs?
That's a really good question. And I'm not sure. However, the Eisenhower encounter happened in February of 1954 on the 19th. It was around that time that suddenly Jackie got this obsession with building a UFO house in New York State, just about 35, 40 miles outside of New York, where he lived in an apartment in Manhattan. And so he had custom built this spaceship, this circular house that overlooked the side of this valley. It was on the edge of a cliff, sort of, and with big bay windows. And he filled it with telescopes and a Tesla coil that he felt that Nikola Tesla, the inventor, used to try to contact aliens. And it's a little-known fact, Jackie was also an avid ham radio operator, and he kept turning the dials, listening in, almost as if he expected to catch an alien broadcast or something. That's how obsessed he was. So at least as far back as 54. And you know what? In my research, I found there was a man named Everett Gleason, who was Dwight Eisenhower's national security advisor, and he met with Eisenhower just before he took off for Palm Springs, and records show Everett Gleason met with Eisenhower as soon as he got back to the White House. So Everett Gleason was born in Brooklyn just 10 years before Jackie. And you've got to wonder, is this some sort of relative who could have tipped Jackie off to this amazing encounter in person in Southern California in '54, and Jackie just went ballistic and had to have his own spaceship house and pretend like he's living in one, and he held parties there over the years. He had it custom built in an airplane hangar, of all places. You know, Eisenhower met with aliens in an airplane hangar. So it's just really strange in how the two stories kind of fit together.
If Gleason was told by Nixon in '73, then he should have been married to Beverly McKittrick at that time.
That is correct. She was his wife for the past few years. When she gave that statement to a tabloid reporter in '74, they had been separated, and Jackie was so furious. They split up. That was the end of their relationship. So she went one step further in 1983.
She's still alive or gone?
I believe she is. I can't find her. I enlisted another investigator. He can't find her either. She would be about 89 years old right now.
What a great interview that would be.
Oh, yeah. She has avoided the press strenuously. She doesn't seem to want to talk about it or write a tell-all book either.
Let's talk about President Eisenhower's close encounters next. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you. We're going to take your calls with Paul Blake Smith next hour. But now we're going to talk about his book that's come out called President Eisenhower's Close Encounters. This, Paul, is one amazing story.
It sure is. I mean, what could be cooler than this? A president of the United States went in secret, maybe with some bodyguards, to meet some landed, friendly, human-like aliens. And in the past year or so, I've been seeing stories online talking about scientists now feel that there are many other Earth-like planets. It's very reasonable and possible, and that on many of these could be human-like beings that look pretty much like us, that have grown and evolved and possibly faster and further than we have. And that's exactly what an eyewitness to the Eisenhower encounter said that these people were. They were very much like humans, only slightly misshapen is the way he described them. He came forward in the early 1980s and said, I ought to know, I was there.
Do I remember as a kid the National Enquirer with a picture of like Eisenhower and aliens meeting?
That is correct. That came out in 1982, I think it was. And this source, a test pilot who wished to remain anonymous, said, I'm going to tell you this story because I've just discovered I'm the last one left alive from this encounter, and I don't want the story to die out. And he said President Eisenhower kept himself carefully surrounded by 6 bodyguards. The test pilot was called in due to his expertise in aerodynamics. And he said these aliens had landed in 5 different craft. 3 were circular and 2 were elongated on a runway at Edwards Air Force Base. And they were checked out, vetted first by base officials who found them to be very friendly, unarmed, and not aggressive or hostile. So they called President Eisenhower at his golf vacation in Palm Springs, about 90 miles away. And he was given the okay to go ahead and fly over there and meet with them. They wanted to talk to him specifically about atomic bomb testing and how it's polluting our planet's land, sea, air, and even into outer space. So that would be a legitimate concern, I would think, if our contamination was, possibly polluting so-called outer space, that aliens were deeply concerned what we're doing to our planet every day. And in the 50s, pollution was getting really bad from factories. So I find that a plausible motivation for human-like aliens who are a little more advanced than we are to sit down and try to plead with the president who's in charge of the atomic bomb detonation program to please stop what you're doing.
Paul, did they tell him what planetary system they came from?
If they did, I have not learned it yet, and I'm disappointed on what the name of their race was. People called them the Etherians or the Visitors, the aliens, whatever. I want to know where they came from specifically. Were they from another dimension or another planet in our galaxy, or from far out beyond our galaxy? How did they know? How long have they been monitoring human beings?
Right.
So there's still information left we don't know.
And were they robotic or were they biological?
Apparently biological. They were slightly different and possibly a grayish-yellow tint to their skin tone. There was an Army manual, Special Operations Manual 101, that was published with the date April 54. That would have been about a month and a half after the Eisenhower encounter, and it laid out the number of aliens that are visiting us and what they look like. And sure enough, they named one that looked very much like humans, but not quite, and said they were about 5 feet tall and had just a little scruff for hair at the top of their heads. Otherwise, they didn't have hair like ours, and they were well-muscled, but not, muscle-bound or abnormal in any great shape. What I'm guessing is they probably had slightly different atmosphere on their planet, so they developed over the centuries and the millennia different lungs, different sized nostrils for breathing, and that's how they looked a little different from us.
And I can't believe they've stopped coming.
Yeah, well, I doubt if they have. It's been alleged in a leaked document from 1989, a review of America's contact with extraterrestrials, which specifically says Eisenhower did meet with these beings, that there were 2 other meetings with Eisenhower to hammer out a treaty or a formal agreement to try to keep them from showing themselves too much. There was a tremendous worry that they were going to start a panic, asking them, do not sit down and start talking to people. You'll cause chaos in our society, and it probably would be that way to this day. So I think a number of presidents have learned this and have adhered to Eisenhower's policy of asking them to, stay away, and we'll provide a little technology for you or a biological sample in return in whatever meeting they have.
Do you think they've approached other governmental leaders of other countries?
It's certainly possible. I'm suspicious about Queen Elizabeth's husband, the Duke, who passed away a year or 2 ago.
Yeah.
He, too, was said to be absolutely obsessed with UFOs in private and had an extensive book collection, and he was related to the Duke of, I forget his name. Darn it, he was a favorite of Prince Charles. Lord Mountbatten, that's who it was, who had a castle that was out in the country, and a gardener came forward with a story. He saw a circular craft in their yard, and that it took off. He was going by on a bicycle, and it knocked him off his bike, and he swore that this was a real event. It was investigated, and they found a little evidence that there might have been a craft that set down, left little pod prints in the grass. No one ever disproved the story. So it makes you wonder if these human-like beings also tried to reach the royal family in England and in perhaps the Soviet Union or China.
Do we know if John F. Kennedy, who followed Eisenhower in the presidency, was given this kind of information as well?
Apparently so. I presented what material I could in a chapter in President Eisenhower's Close Encounters. It's just fascinating as can be that he also wanted to have his own encounter, or at least see evidence. And supposedly Marilyn Monroe was told some pillow talk that he did go to an Air Force base out west, she said, and saw these gray-skinned, big-headed alien bodies. So who knows? It's very possible.
Did the ETs ever come back and want to reclaim their bodies?
That would be a very good question to pose. Why didn't they come back to these crashes that we hear about and pick up their brethren? Unless...
And the remains of the ships.
Right. Unless they kind of didn't mind that we got it, that they felt we were advanced enough to handle it, and we kind of were. Plus, these grays, as we call them, were what Philip Corso said, bio-robots, like they had been cloned in a laboratory somewhere. And they weren't really quite sentient, feeling human beings like you and I, that they were like programmed for space flight and exploration in small scout crafts, but that even the alien race that were masters of these biorobots didn't care much, so they're dead. We'll go out and get some more from the lab.
Tell us about the 1941 crash near Cape Girardeau.
Well, what we just mentioned would be an excellent description of what was found in a field outside of my hometown, about 12 or 13 miles from downtown Cape Girardeau, according to a Christian pastor and another source or two, who said that a circular disc came down, it crash-landed in a farm field, and that there was metallic debris, shrapnel all over the place. And some of the townspeople spread the word by phone, and first responders showed up, including men in military uniform, an FBI agent, possibly the county sheriff, who was related to someone who was part of an aerial training program in Sikeston, Missouri, and that's how the word could have gone out so quickly, because the military came in that night and circled the crash site and said, put down that shrapnel, leave those bodies alone, we'll take all your notes, your photos. This did not happen. It's a matter of national security. And a Christian pastor who was there said he was sworn to secrecy, possibly even using his own Bible, ironically, and that just like Jackie Gleason, who came home and told his wife, the Christian pastor went home and was pale and shaken, and his family said, what happened? Where have you been? And he said, I'm going to tell you this story once, and I'm never going to speak of it again. And he lived up to that. He told his family there were these strange creatures from space, little spacemen. He didn't say extraterrestrial or UFO or even flying saucer. He just said their little space machine crash-landed in a farm field, and he went to pray over their bodies. If they had souls, he prayed for their eternal soul, and he saw one of the aliens being propped up by two local men and having its picture taken. And that 2 weeks after the crash, he said a photographer came by, recognized him from the crash, and said, I've got a copy of this photo. I want you to have a copy. And it was the picture of the alien being propped up, this dead body, and posed by two men in civilian attire. So there are lots of little bits and pieces that you can use to piece together the story. I wrote 2 books about it. My publisher is going under, so I'm combining the 2 books into one really solid one for a new publisher, and I hope to get that out later this year.
Good for you. If you need some help, let us know, because we know a
you
couple.
Got any scoops for me? I appreciate it.
I have a theory called the boardroom theory, that everybody in a secret boardroom meeting has a confidant, and that confidant has a confidant, and that confidant has a confidant. So after the board meeting where they say, now this is totally confidential, we're selling the company, don't say a word to anybody, the meeting's adjourned, and every one of those board members has a confidant. So they tell that person, and that person has one, and they all have one. By the end of the day, everybody knows what's going on.
Right. It sounds like a Cape Girardeau fireman by the name of Walter Reynolds, who said, you see these stories now popping up in the news about this Christian pastor admitting that he went to this UFO crash with aliens? He said that story is absolutely true. The firefighter was on somewhat of his deathbed. He had stage 4 cancer. He said, I went to the site. The Army caught me trying to pocket debris. They chewed me out. I had to hand it over, and they kicked me out of the site. And he felt he was being followed around Cape Girardeau in the aftermath, and that his phone was tapped. So I looked it up and said 1941 was an especially voluminous year for wiretapping by the FBI, sometimes even ordered by the president. And they would sit there and read the transcripts of some of these conversations. They shouldn't have been doing this. They skirted around the law. So that was one way of the government keeping a close eye on people like this, even as far back as 6 years before Roswell.
Paul's websites are linked up at coasttocoastam.com. It's truly remarkable. I've always wondered, though, Paul, that they come here at astronomical distances and they crash. Why?
We have pilots who are quite familiar with our gravity and our electromagnetic forces, and they crash. And sometimes it's bad weather, mechanical issues, pilot error, or just plain stupidity, not paying attention. So I guess aliens who come from a long way off and they're not familiar with this planet and our gravity and our weather and everything, I guess they could crash too.
They're not immune from that, I guess.
That's right.
That is amazing. When we come back after the break, I want to talk with you about this anonymous source you have about the Nixon presidency and some other cases. So between the Dwight Eisenhower case and what Nixon knew, which one do you think is the biggest story?
I would say the original contact that Eisenhower was told he could do this, and it was set up in advance. It wasn't just something that happened out of the blue, that he approved this, that he had his own UFO sighting when he was on the deck of a ship, or on the bridge, rather, in early 1952, just before he announced he was going to run for president. A sailor on this ship, the USS Franklin Roosevelt, said that Eisenhower and the crew on the bridge stood there and watched this spacecraft, this circular disc, just hang in the air for like up to 10 or 15 minutes. And that Eisenhower said, well, I'll look into this, boys. You keep it under your hats for now. And they never got back to him on it. But he was sort of broken into this and intrigued by the notion of life beyond Earth. Visiting here, and certainly we could do a whole half hour on Foo Fighters, or the UFOs of World War II. And so Eisenhower is probably pretty well versed in the subject and was open to having a meeting with some friendly beings.
Now, Nixon was his vice president. Was he brought in on some of these?
I don't think at first, but at one point he almost had to have been, especially after Eisenhower had a heart attack in 1955. And there was a real chance that Nixon would ascend to the presidency. Linda Moulton Howe has a source, he's passed on now, named Cooper Stein, who said he worked with military intelligence and the CIA, and that he was brought in to brief President Eisenhower and Nixon on the extraterrestrial situation in the late 50s. He said Nixon kind of had this blank, stunned look on his face, like he had not been well briefed in advance of this meeting.
Right, kind of shocked him.
Yes, so that might have been his first taste of it. And Linda felt this man was very serious. I've talked to another contact who said, yes, I'm familiar with this Cooper Stein. He was the real deal. I believe what he said, and that was one of the things that Eisenhower was keenly interested in, and that Nixon was made aware.
Were there some presidents that did not know what the heck was going on?
That's quite possible. Jimmy Carter had his own UFO sightings, but he made maybe a terrible mistake. During his campaign for the presidency, he said, when I become president, I'm going to throw open all the files and tell the American people what's going on, because I've seen a UFO too. So, he's probably the last one they're going to inform, because he had tipped them off in advance that he's going to reveal it all. So I think Carter was kept in the dark.
He's in home hospice now, 98 years old.
Yeah, had a good life.
Can you believe how far back that was?
Yeah, to you and I, we kind of recall the 70s pretty well, but to some people that's ancient history, and it's amazing that he had a UFO sighting, and so did Ronald Reagan.
Reagan did too, yep.
In 1974.
And Clinton was interested in this too, wasn't he?
Absolutely, and he wanted the facts, and I don't think he was told much of anything.
Yeah, not every president got the information. We're going to come back and take some calls with you next, Paul, on Coast to Coast. This hour, we'll take your calls with Paul Blake Smith as we talk about the incredible story of the Nixon-Gleason alien encounter and President Eisenhower's close encounters. All that and more next with your calls on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back, George Norrie, along with Paul Blake Smith. Paul, did Nixon ever have an alien encounter or just the visitation to Homestead?
That we may never know. I've got what we alluded to in the last hour, a kind of secret contact. I can't give you his name, but he has contacts beyond anything I've got. He's got them in military and intelligence and journalism. And so I asked him about the Eisenhower story, and he was a little skeptical at first, but he said, I'll look into it. I'll see what they have to say. And he came back and he said, you got me on this one. They said the story's true. Eisenhower did meet with extraterrestrials, and he formed an agreement, and your story is right on. So recently I pushed him a little. Did they say anything about Richard Nixon? Because I could use a quote for the book. He says, well, I'm skeptical of that, but I'll look into it. And recently he got back to me and said, well, you've done it to me again. The answer is yes. Nixon did go to Homestead. He did meet or at least see some extraterrestrials there, and he forged a new agreement. He wanted to update and maybe surpass what Eisenhower did, his old boss. And so there really was contact at Homestead. And he said, Paul, you've done it again. Now, I'm not making this up. I can't give you this guy's name, but I trust him. And it's certainly nice to get confirmation from people who know people higher up than I do.
I was going to say, do you think you know where he got his information?
Pretty much. He can't describe it in any detail beyond military intelligence and journalism. He said two of the journalists are well known. You'd recognize their names. So he won't tell me anything beyond that, and I will trust him.
Interesting. Let's take some calls. We'll be coming up on them in a second. And the information with Jackie Gleason is just incredible. Paul?
Yeah, Jackie was so obsessed with his UFO book collection, he amassed over 1,700 volumes of books and paranormal publications, and you can still see them at the University of Miami in a special reading room there. And that should be proof positive that the guy was just way overboard in a positive way, I think. I don't think he went crazy at any time. He was a pretty well-balanced fellow, and he was so funny. I remember Burt Reynolds said we were making Smokey and the Bandit, and Jackie just had us on the floor laughing. He was so bright and so funny.
He was one of a kind. He was asked by CBS to renew The Honeymooners after like 4 years, I think, and he said, no, we've gone as far as we're going to go.
Yeah, they did make the occasional special after that. But he wanted to move on to other things. He could do so many things so well, like shoot pool and play golf and slug back the most booze without it affecting him with his celebrity friends like Frank Sinatra and Bob Hope and U.S. presidents.
Did he bring in Foster Brooks as a comic?
I think that was Dean Martin who did that.
Dean Martin did that? Okay.
Yeah.
I love that. Let's go to the phones. Catherine's with us in British Columbia, Canada. Welcome to the program. Hi, Catherine.
Hi, you guys. I had to call in on this one because my whole life, whenever I hear Roswell's story, I always think that the humans were the ones that were doing the cloning of humans.
Tell me more. Tell me more.
Well, we're the only ones that could smash up a spaceship, right? Like, I think aliens aren't that stupid.
So you think these were us?
I believe so.
From the future?
And the test went awry, right? You know.
I don't think we had that kind of technology at the time, did we, Paul?
I certainly don't think so. We've tried to adapt it, reverse engineer it, and understand it, and I think the metals are not really from this world, and we can't synthesize them too well, recreate them at all perfectly, and the technology was probably quite over our head for decades, and that's why it's taking so long. But, Philip Corso said he did get technology from the Roswell craft, and he personally started seeding it to other companies, corporations, so they could take that information and adapt it into modern, like night vision, for example. Now, I assume that is true. The companies kind of deny it, but I don't know if they were told that it was extraterrestrial when they were given this information and the material. They probably were just said, what can you make of this?
Do you think the 1941 Cape Girardeau crash was related to the 1947 Roswell crash?
In a sense, they have a lot of similarities along with these gray, big-headed beings with big, dark eyes and a crashed disk. So it could be that there was a second craft, as you may know, in Roswell. And I was talking to Linda Moulton Howe about this, and she said, oh, yes, they feel that it's very possible that the second craft was a kind of ejected emergency craft that came out of an escape pod that came out of the original one. And in my Cape Girardeau research, there is this allegation, I can't prove it whatsoever, that there was a second crash site of a smaller object that came down, and you could hypothesize reasonably that it was very much like Roswell, that a smaller escape pod came down, maybe ejected automatically as the ship was in free fall.
Now, there was another crash at Corona, New Mexico, wasn't there?
Yeah, apparently there were a number of them, and there were so many sightings in New Mexico in the 40s where they were developing the atomic bomb and running some tests and such, and so many scientists that people just kind of yawned at one point, and they were just accustomed to seeing these discs flying through the mountain side, the air of the desert, and all around Corona and Roswell and Sandia National Labs and what's the big one? Los Alamos laboratories there.
Now, Nixon died Gleason died in 1987.
Right.
I believe. So he carried this secret with him for, 14 years?
Yes. Apparently he was not prone to tell anyone, and there, to my knowledge, no deathbed confession, so that he didn't leave anything behind. If he did, it hasn't surfaced or someone has kept it hushed. I really don't have faith in our government to allow that to come out in full or to make a disclosure. I know a lot of people are hopeful, but I don't have confidence that we'll get an official disclosure that we are indeed being visited, and by a number of races.
Joe in the Bronx, take it away, Joseph.
Hey, George, how are you?
Great, thank you.
Good. Paul, my uncle, who worked a little bit in Hollywood, he was a prop master, knew Jackie Gleason personally. He used to do some upholstery work on Jackie Gleason's apartment. I believe it was when Gleason was living in Manhattan.
Right.
His son relayed to me, about stories that Jackie Gleason, their encounters there with Gleason. I wanted to ask, is there any document anywhere where the aliens personally identified themselves by name?
I'm trying to think. This 1989 Defense Intelligence Agency document that people call above top secret, it was leaked in 2017. They may have come up with a name in there, or simply the government applied EBE, extraterrestrial biological entity. If they gave their name of their race, I don't recall seeing it. However, one extraterrestrial was salvaged from the Aztec, New Mexico crash, and he spoke English, and he communicated with our scientists, and he gave his name as Septimus. And so they had to go by that name, and he said that his race has been visiting here for many thousands of years, and that they are observing us. They mean us no harm, and they were human-like in nature. And so I don't have a specific example beyond that document.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Next up, Norman in St. Louis. Hi, Norm. Go ahead.
Hey, it's a great show tonight.
They always are, Norm. They always are.
I know they are. That's why I listen every night. Back about 6 years ago, me and my son, we seen a couple of UFOs up on a night they were in St. Louis over at Lambert Airport. And, they were jetting back and forth real fast and about 3 or 4 times higher than normal airplanes. So I guess like 100,000 feet up or something. But it was really weird because I've been on the show before and asked another guest that was in the UFOs. But he mentioned like sometimes kind of strange things happen after that. And soon after that, that we had about 10 inches of snow. And I went out the next morning and there were feet prints from my fence. I had about a 12-foot by 12-foot garden in the back. And these footprints went and they were like maybe 6 inches rectangular, like 6 inches long by maybe 2 inches wide. They went over this fence to my garden, and then they went in the garden, which had a 3-foot chicken wire fence up, and they went into the garden, but there was only like 2 or 3 prints in there, then hopped over the garden, went out about 3 or 4 foot, and then disappeared. Now, if it's a bird or something, you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I took pictures and sent them in to coast in different places, like our local TV, and to this day, no one's identified, the dimension. Like it's not definitely not a deer or a rabbit or who knows what it was. But my question is, okay, we always see, like you were talking about Nixon and Gleason, and there was 4 dead aliens or whatnot. I've always wondered. My thought was if they're coming, do we ever know like at least a general area in the universe they're coming from? And once they get here, if there's living ones that have wrecked or whatever, how would they adapt to, let's say, our atmosphere? They're coming from, who knows, millions of miles, thousands of miles away. What food do they eat? How do they? I don't even want to eat the food we have now with Monsanto glyphosate and all those chemicals they're spraying down on us from, the airplanes. And, I don't even want to eat that, so I scrub it all with water and everything. You know what I'm saying? So,
yeah. It's
how
a
would
good point. How would they breathe our air? In the Cape Girardeau crash, these 3 beings were apparently dragged from the wreckage, and they were respirating. Their lungs kind of went up and down. 2 of them were dead, but the Christian pastor who was saying prayers said, I looked at this one, and he was still breathing a little bit, but none of the creatures had any visible injuries. How did they die? It seems quite apparent they weren't able to breathe our oxygen-rich atmosphere outside their spaceship. They had a climate-controlled spaceship. It cracked open. And
they didn't have time
they had no injuries.
They didn't have time to put on any breathing apparatuses, right?
That would freak me out if I saw these footprints in the snow around anywhere I live. That's kind of spooky, and I wonder if the aliens were looking for George. Are you still up in the St. Louis area?
Back and forth. Right now I'm in Los Angeles, but I'll be back in St. Louis soon.
Your friends, your relatives came by for a visit, I think.
You never know. You never know. You heard of Frank Strange's, his book, Stranger at the Pentagon?
Yes.
Valiant Thor.
I don't have a lot of confidence in that story. I read where they assured that this extraterrestrial came down and was ushered right to the White House, and President Eisenhower saw him. And they gave a specific date. So I looked it up, and Eisenhower was not even in the country at the time. He was on a ship steaming to a summit meeting in the Bahamas. So I'm skeptical, and there's so many different photos you see on the Internet claiming this is Valiant Thor. No, this is Valiant Thor, and it's all of a different gentleman, just a regular guy that they claim this is an alien. So I'm pretty cynical towards that story.
Kathleen's with us in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Welcome to the show. Hi, Kathleen.
Hi, George. Hi, Paul.
Ooh.
What I want to ask is about that rumor. Were there UFOs over the White House? And if so, elaborate on it.
1952.
Yeah, there were UFOs over the Capitol in 52 when Nixon was a congressman, but at the time, he and Eisenhower were at the Republican convention accepting the nomination. They were not in D.C. at that specific time. And now I've got an interesting story. It clues right into Richard Nixon. According to astralcitizens.com, there was a football-shaped UFO that was hovering over the White House, trespassing into national airspace. Nixon was made aware of this. There wasn't much they could do. They said it was glowing red and, as I mentioned, football in shape, and that he ordered an investigation, wanted it kept quiet. This was in his first months as president. But somebody looked like they were trying to get his attention, and that's a story I'd sure like to know more about.
Interesting take. Paul, of everything you've heard about, which fascinates you the most?
Oh, gosh. What worries me is the extraterrestrials who might be coming here who are not friendly, who do not have the best of intentions. I don't think we're going to be invaded. I don't think we're going to be enslaved, that we're now into a point in society where we're all very highly armed and infectious diseases are spreading and we've sapped the planet of its resources. If they were going to invade, I think they would have done it a few thousand years ago. So I just find it quite fascinating, the idea of different friendly races coming here and wanting to speak to us and uplift us, educate us, and maybe someday they can do that more openly.
Let's go to Frank in Maryland. Welcome to the show. Hi, Frank.
Howdy, George. Glad to be back with you. You stole my thunder about Valiant 4.
Okay.
This must be a made-up Hollywood name because an alien from another planet wouldn't have such a name as if they would call him any kind of name. But my question is, how are they communicated so well with these alien beings? Was it telepathy, or did they have what we have now at the UN, the translation, instantaneous translation?
What do you think of that, Paul?
I think it's a very good question. According to the eyewitness who was at the alien encounter, the visitors spoke English and were familiar with our culture, our language, and our government programs. So they had been studying us. They are very intelligent. So he did not mention a translator device.
Isn't it possible they've been coming here since the beginning of mankind?
Very possible.
They may have been the ones that seeded us, right?
I don't know about that. We could have evolved naturally, but that's possible too.
Paul, give out your websites.
www.mo41.info, and you can go to Facebook pages. I got a number of social media pages like Twitter and Instagram and LinkedIn where you can learn some more.
Where do we get your books that you've published already?
You can get the President Eisenhower's Close Encounters on audiobook from Tantor.com. You can get it from Foundations and always from Amazon.com. It's always an excellent source to get my books.
Paul Blake Smith is his name, of course. And we're going to come back in a moment and take final calls. This is amazing. Is that UFO house in New York still available?
CBS owned it for many years, and they used a realtor to rent it out. And David Bowie was one of the UFO fans who
really
had to rent it. Yeah, he lived there for a while.
How big was the house?
There were a number of houses all around it, and some of them were circular, like it was a fleet of UFOs that landed. But the exact square footage escapes me right now of the main house.
Okay, we're going to come back in just a moment on Coast to Coast AM with Paul Blake Smith and take final calls. Don't touch your dial. And we'll be back with Paul Blake Smith and take final calls as we talk about these incredible stories of the Nixon-Gleason alien encounter and President Eisenhower's close encounters as well. On our next Coast to Coast program, Ben Davidson joins us to talk about space news and space weather. And then later on, Erika Gabriel joins us to talk about crossing over to the other side. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie along with Paul Blake Smith. His website is linked up at coasttocoastam.com. Paul, what do you think they did with the Cape Girardeau debris from 1941?
There's a story that a Christian pastor who was a cousin to Cordell Hull, the famous Secretary of State for Franklin Roosevelt, the two of them went down like 6-7 stories below the U.S. Capitol building where there are lots of storerooms, and he was shown the evidence for this, that he said it was cut up into pieces, the spacecraft. There were boxes of debris and 3 glass jars with 3 dead aliens with big heads and big black eyes. And I was called a few years ago by the son of a member of the Roosevelt administration who said, my father took me to the same sounding storeroom underneath the Capitol. He said it was the last day of school, I think in 1941. And in late May, I think it was, and he showed it to me, and his dad didn't have too much to say. He said, oh, this looks like a storeroom, all right, and they looked it over, and then they got out of there. So I think immediately they were stashed in this place where Freemasons like Franklin Roosevelt, Vice President Henry Wallace, and almost the entire administration of FDR were Freemasons. They revere the Capitol building above all other buildings.
Your upcoming book, The Nixon-Gleason Alien Encounter, would make a great movie.
Oh, it sure would. We're trying to get some, my manager is trying to get some interest in Hollywood people. It's not easy. I'm trying to be patient. But before we go back to the callers, I would like to pay tribute very quickly to Robbie Graham and Richard Belzer, two UFO authors. Of course, one's a famous comedian. They both passed away just like a day or two ago, and God bless them. They did good work, didn't they?
We mentioned it yesterday. It's very sad. Mike Heiser died, too.
Oh, boy, this has been a rough week.
It sure is. Sure is indeed. Who would play Jackie Gleason?
There was a TV movie where that actor, the tall Brad Garrett from Everyone Loves Raymond, played Jackie pretty credibly. However, Brad Garrett's like 6'7", and they had to kind of artfully squeeze him into looking like a short, heavy-set Jackie. So in today's world, I just don't know. We'd have to find a real talent search for a young talent who can act and do all the things that Jackie did. I don't think you're going to ever top the Great One, is what they called him.
Yeah, because the movie would have to include the honeymooners and things like that, and then get serious with a Richard Nixon look-alike.
I enjoyed the Honeymooners episode in which Ralph goes to a costume party and he finds things around the apartment, puts them on, and declares, "I am the man from space." He was talking about aliens, even on the Honeymooners episode. You can see it to this day.
Joe in Rochester, New York. Take it away, Joseph.
George, thanks for taking the call.
Thank you, Joe.
I got a quick question, Paul, regarding the Eisenhower meeting. Was there a contract that was signed for them to allow them to abduct U.S. citizens for exchange for, like, information? And the other question I had was, what was the purpose of the origination of the Majestic 12? What was, like, the underlying cause for Eisenhower to create that right afterwards? I appreciate it, George. Thanks for taking the call.
Thank you.
Majestic 12 was put together by Harry Truman after the Roswell crash and included some famous names. And I believe that probably did get put together. It makes a lot of sense to get the top military and academic Joint Intelligence Committee, which I think is what MAGIC stood for, and they got about 12 people to put their best brains behind what is going on. In answer to your other question, darn it, it escapes me now. What was his first question?
Oh, the first question was the contract.
Oh, yeah.
Made.
That Eisenhower had to come to some sort of agreement to get these friendly beings to not show themselves and not go over major cities and put on a big display or sit down and land and try to talk in English to people. And he may have agreed in a treaty or a contract that you could pick up some of our human beings in rural settings where you won't set off a panic of any sort and look them over and put them back as long as you give us a list of names. We want their names. And apparently something went wrong with this treaty or this agreement, but also there are other aliens coming here who may have taken advantage of this and decided we're going to take you and look you over whether you like it or not, and we don't have to have any agreement with Eisenhower. And how would Eisenhower also get this ratified or, back it up? How would he enforce an agreement? So it became pretty dicey. But Don Phillips is an engineer who worked for Skunk Works, and he gave a recorded interview and said, I saw the agreement, the file that Eisenhower had on extraterrestrials. They showed it to me as part of our reverse engineering of extraterrestrial craft. And he said, Eisenhower told the aliens, how can we stop you? You're so advanced. So even he recognized that, they're going to pretty much do whatever they want, and he got the best deal he could get, I think, for America.
Paul, you've heard of UFO researcher David Jacobs, right?
Oh, yes.
He believes that the visitations are very nefarious. And
That could be, but again, there are different extraterrestrials with different agendas and different methods of operation, and we may not be in any sort of compact or agreement with some of them who just do as they please. It is frightening, some of these stories of artificial insemination or hybrid, human-alien hybrids. It's not one of my favorite subjects. And the worst one of all is the cattle mutilation, in which it certainly appears laser-like cuts for cattle that are just thrown back on the ground, or even, as Linda Moulton Howe said, that a couple have been thrown over high voltage, like telephone wires, after they've been jettisoned. Organs have been removed, and it's just really unpleasant and kind of scary to contemplate.
And suspicious.
Yes.
East of the Rockies, Veronica in the state of Maryland. Hello, Veronica. You there? Nope. She has hung up.
We've been snubbed.
Let's go to Doug in Kansas City, Kansas. Hey, Doug.
Yeah, hey, how you doing?
Great. Good to have you with us.
I appreciate you accepting my call.
Absolutely. Go ahead with your question.
Well, I saw an unidentified flying object in my neighborhood several years ago, before I had access to a video phone or anything like that. It was around 2010, 2011. But I had pulled up into my street, and I saw this craft floating above the tree line with, it looked like 3 big windows or 3 big lights in front of it, and it looked kind of like the hood-shaped object that was on the War of the Worlds movie.
Yep.
But it was huge. It was bigger than a city bus.
Wow.
And I looked at it for a little bit, and my house was right there, so I pulled in the garage, and I called to my wife, "You got to come out and see this." And I ran out the back door, and before she could get there, I saw it make a turn toward the east and then just zoom away faster than I've seen anything before. Now, I'm not saying it was alien, anything like that. I just know it was unidentified. And I haven't heard anything from anybody else around the area about having seen it.
A lot of people are getting these reports still, Paul.
Yes, and I'm a little jealous. I've never seen one myself. I'm not going to make anything up. I think personal integrity is important. When people in my apartment building found out about my books, they started coming up to me with their own stories, including the little old lady in her mid-90s across the hall who said when she was a little girl on a farm in Alabama, she saw this spaceship in the distance in a pasture, she and her father, and she wanted to go over, and her father said, "No, leave them alone. We're just going to watch, and we're not going to get any closer." And she said it sat there for a little bit, and then it just took off. And I'm thinking she was a church-going Christian, the last person this little lady would be telling me this. And so there's all people from all walks of life, many very educated professionals, and in the military, the police, the pilots and such. And I am convinced that, again and again, we are being visited and observed. And what did they say on that 60 Minutes special about a year or two ago? The military pilots say we see these things every time we go out on a mission.
Yep, absolutely. Text and tweets, what do you have for Paul, Tom?
Hey, Paul, this one's from Janine in Rhode Island. She wants you to talk about ET life and any connection they might have or if they feel human emotion.
That's a very good question. I keep finding these grays have almost no emotion, that they have no empathy. They're not sentient beings like you and I, and that's how they could possibly take us and look us over, even though we're possibly in pain or very uncomfortable, and unfortunately probe us, and then put us back, even though it's extremely unpleasant. They just don't have feelings, some of them. Now, the human beings is what I call them, human types that met with Eisenhower, apparently were very friendly and very intelligent, compassionate, and they give off a good vibe. So you're just going to get a variety of, some of them are cold-hearted, and some of them are warm-hearted, just like when you go down the street or you go to a shopping mall. There are friendly people and some not-so-friendly people here on Earth.
What do we know about what they wanted?
That's another good question. What is their motivation? In the Eisenhower case, they wanted us to cease our atomic bomb testing program, but others may be here for biological needs and for reproducing their race, or they just want specimens of plants and animals, or to study our civilizations, or go out into the forest and study our flora and fauna. We have so much to offer extraterrestrials to come here and see a variety of things. For all we know, some of them could be high school students doing a school project, and then they go back to their classroom and write a paper, in a sense. That these could be just scientists who are curious about our world and know not to get involved. And as someone once said, when you go to the zoo, you don't talk to the animals. You just look at them, and then you go.
Mary in Missouri, let's squeeze you in. Mary, go ahead.
Hello, George and Paul. I want to ask you, Paul, have you ever talked to Laura Eisenhower, Eisenhower's granddaughter?
I did not. I was all set to, and then I found a video where she explains everything that she knew. So I put that in my book. She does believe in a lot of extraterrestrial theories.
She's been on our show, Paul, and we've met her in person at live events.
She certainly does endorse and believe in the encounter in first person by her great-grandfather. She's the, granddaughter or great-granddaughter?
Great, probably.
Yeah, that's right. And so there's another source. Susan Eisenhower has written a little bit online. I put it in my book that she believes that we are being visited. And more examples of Susan Eisenhower was once married to a Russian scientist who said that in the Soviet Union it is very accepted among scientists that we are being visited. It's not a joke.
How about Werner von Braun's assistant, Carol Rosen? She knew a lot, too.
And so did Albert Einstein, who had an intern. You know, that tape recording has surfaced now. She was a college professor at the University of Miami and said in 1947, I was an intern for Albert Einstein, and we flew to what appeared to be New Mexico and looked over the crash recoveries. She was very serious that this really did happen, and she had great credentials. So again and again, we find that the government did plenty of research on their own, but they just didn't want to tell us about it.
Paul, keep up the great work. You really have done a marvelous job.
I thank you very much, and I hope all the listeners enjoyed the show and will enjoy the book when it comes out this spring.
You let us know when it's out, okay?
All right, I sure will.
That's Paul Blake Smith, the latest book that he has that is not out yet, but it'll come out, The Nixon Gleason Alien Encounter. For Dan Galante, Tom Danheiser, Lisa Lyon, Lex Lonehood, Sean Ladouceur, Timothy Banal, Stephanie Smith, Chris Burrows, George Knapp, and Ian Punnett, I'm George Norrie, somewhere out there on Coast to Coast AM. We'll see you on our next edition. Until then, be safe, everyone.